Joey Flores, today's guest, is the founder and managing director of Inversion Art, an investment program for fine artists, providing them with the capital, connections, know-how, and operational support they need to produce their greatest work. He will share insights about his work and his superpower. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show, where we empower you. Joey, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm excited to get to know you and about the work you're doing at Inversion Art.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Super excited to, be a part of this.
Well, this is a new thing. Of course, you've had a varied, interesting, exciting career with all kinds of cool things that you've done in the past, but the success you've had in the past suggests that this new venture has great promise. So tell us about Inversion Art.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe some of your audience is familiar with an organization out of Silicon Valley called Combinator. For those who are not, it is an investment program for technology entrepreneurs that is roundly considered the best in the world and has spawned some of the biggest companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and many others everyone will have heard of. I got to go through that program with my last company, and now it was very life altering, just an incredible opportunity. And now I'm trying to mimic that and build a program inspired by it for the art world. So it is an investment program similar to what they do in certain ways and different in others. But essentially what we do is invest in 2 batches of fine artists each year. We're starting with 15 in the first group. We invest in them. These are fine artists whose works we believe may eventually end up in museums and worth millions of dollars. Very, very, high impact fine art artists with an interesting trajectory, traction in the market, institutional recognition already happening. They may be late emerging or mid-career. We invest in them by buying artwork from them, a significant amount, an amount equal to 30% of what they earned last year. So if an artist made $200,000, we're going to buy $60,000 worth of their artwork, which is probably 3 to 4 pieces. Could be paintings, sculptures. There may be some digital stuff. A lot of people ask about that, but it's principally tangible physical objects we're collecting. We put those in a collection that we hold on to for at least 5 years. And then we put the artist through an accelerator program are very common in the tech space, but are not common at all in the art space. So it's a 3-month program where our mentors sit with them and try to help them strategize for the next 3 to 5 years of their career, create a sort of vision and strategy plan around that. And then at the end of the program, we bring in a high-level audience of curators, collectors, gallery owners, and other professionals from the cultural sector to check out the artists we're working with and hopefully establish relationships with them to maybe exhibit them at the museum they work at or represent them out of the gallery that they work at. So we're trying to get these artists next level opportunities. And then, in a slight variation away from the original program that this is inspired by, we actually, for 5 years, power the back office of their studios. So unlike entrepreneurs who are expected to sort of hire, scale, and take care of things on their own, these are artists who, they need to be focused on their creative work. So we actually just take all of that off their plate. We handle it for them, and we take 15% of revenue share for providing those services, and ultimately free them up to pursue their most ambitious goals.
It's an exciting model. I have a friend who's a serious artist who spent years trying to hone his craft and make a career out of his art. Ultimately, he ended up in graphic design and marketing. Now he's a big shot in Silicon Valley, so I don't feel sorry for him. But I do wonder what would have happened if he had had the opportunity to participate in a program like this. What do you hope happens? What's the difference you hope to make?
Well, I think there's just, this is just an area where there's not a lot of readily available capital. It's very strange. These artists are making work that can go from $20,000 price point today to $2.5 million 5 years from now. It's very similar to stock prices, right? Like from these startups, these high growth startups, there's the opportunity for exponential returns in the fine art space. And yet there's like nobody providing them with like a reliable source of early stage capital. And so, what we hope to do really is to create sort of a generational organization that changes the way artists get funded. We're starting in the fine art space, but after we've sort of established our brand and credibility in that space, we hope to open this up to more commercial artists, to maybe even architects. My sister runs a dance studio. She's got an MFA. They don't teach you about how to run a dance studio when you're getting your MFA. So we see the opportunity to support basically creative entrepreneurs of all kinds, but we're very, very bullish on the fine art space. So, in a dream scenario, we back these artists. A huge percentage of them have long, very successful careers. I mean, really, I think providing them with stability and longevity of career is a huge, like part of our mission. And then, of course, on the financial side, we expect anywhere from 5 to 15% of our artists to do incredibly well, and ultimately return big profits to the organization. But the goal is that all of them are able to sort of have long careers, be working in fine art as long as they want to, and achieving the goals that they sort of want for themselves.
Yeah. Uh, as you uh, reflect on your own experience, you've been really successful. I wonder if you could just take a minute and tell us about some of your successes. And I want you to be sure to talk about your experience with your band,
Sure.
because that's maybe your most bona fide stretch as an artist. I know you do some painting too, but talk a little bit about your career, your art, and how all that comes together now.
Sure. Well, so I've always been an artist. When I was a kid, I used to illustrate a lot. I would try to reproduce my favorite comic book art. I would draw pictures out of like random magazines and try to just make it. I was always like trying to copy things exactly like that. That's how I kind of learned art. And then I got into high school. Painting was a requirement in the art classes I took, so I got a little more into painting. Whereas previously I was more of an illustrator. And then something happened, and I just didn't really pursue art after high school. But I've always been a very creative person. So, in my very early 20s, I got introduced to the spoken word scene. I had been writing these cute little raps, but they were very silly, sort of, the kind of raps that like brag about your rapping skills and, the kinds of things that just don't have a lot of substance to them. And then my friend took me to a place called the Poetry Lounge in Los Angeles, which is one of the longest running spoken word venues in the country. And I just saw people saying things that it blew my mind. It was so inspirational. I was like, whoa, I've been talking about dumb stuff. These people are like, to say that, they have that one line in the poem and you get chills down your spine. You're like, wow, that was awesome. And so this just really inspired me. And all of a sudden I went home, I started writing a lot of spoken word, and, got very into that. Started performing spoken word. Started being a featured performer at I was a featured performer at the Rose Theater in Venice, and I was making a little place for myself in the spoken word community. And at the same time, I had been a drummer. I'd always wanted, I'd wanted to be a drummer since I was like 10 years old. I finally started when I was 20. I got sort of gifted a drum set, and finally started playing when I was like 20 years old. So I was taking lessons, and I've always become like really good friends with my instructors. I love people who are like, experts at what they do, and we always become fast friends. And so my drum instructor and I had been becoming friends. And one day in class, in the lesson, I said, listen, he graduated magna cum laude from Berkeley, composition degree. He was not only a drummer, but an incredible composer. And he specialized in jazz. And I said, I've been doing spoken word, and I have this idea to put together like a jazz group with spoken word over the top of that. It's a little bit more hip hoppy because all of my stuff rhymes, but what do you think? He's like, well, let's hear it. So like he started playing a beat. I started performing over the top of that, and he was like, that's not bad at all. Like that sounds pretty cool. Let's write a few songs, see how it goes. So anyways, long story short, we got into a band together. It quickly spiraled out of control. We created a 10-piece funk, jazz, and hip hop ensemble. A vibraphone, trumpet, trombone, sax. It's just a huge group. Very jazzy, very funky, hip hop, rock. It was really eccentric. We got everything from, you guys sound like Frank Zappa to Chicago to Rage Against the Machine. Like really, really eccentric stuff. And we recorded a full-length album. We were selected to open for Arrested Development at the Colorado Music Summit in Denver. And, we felt like we had created a good album. We had fans. We were selling, plenty of tickets for, shows in LA. Our CD release party was completely sold out. And but we just could like not market this stuff at all. It was like impossible. Like, and everybody we talked to was having the same problem. Like all the bands just having trouble with marketing. I mean, we knew people who'd been nominated for Grammys and they were struggling the same way we were. So we ultimately ended up coming up with an idea for a tech platform that would help musicians with marketing. And after 2 years of talking about it, running it past all of our musician friends, everyone was so excited about the idea that finally we decided to dive in 2010. And then the band pretty much came to a stop. Once you start a company like that, it's pretty much all consuming. So the band came to an end, but we moved on to a chapter of supporting other bands instead.
Well, and tell us a little bit about the outcome of the app, because that was your Y Combinator company, right?
It was, yeah. So we started it in 2010. Essentially, what it was is it was trying to turn a streaming platform into a real valuable marketing tool for bands. Instead of trying to use it to sell ads and commercials and subscriptions to consumers, we used it as a marketing tool. And so, yeah, we got into Y Combinator in 2011. Went from not being able to get any investor meetings to raising $1.7 million from some of the best investors out there, and it was just a life changing opportunity. I mean, we became really, really good friends with a bunch of incredible entrepreneurs. Several of them are now investors in my latest project, and it just can't be overstated how powerful that community is. So yeah, we got into YC with that. At the time, it was very hard to raise venture capital money. We raised all of our money from angels. Venture capitalists were not putting any money into the music space at that time. There were no successful exits. Pandora and Spotify were losing tens of millions of dollars every year. So we weren't able to raise additional VC capital. And so kind of forced into a sale in 2015. Wasn't exactly the outcome we wanted, but we were very happy to finally be acquired in 2015. And by that time, there was 15,000 bands and 600 record labels using the service.
That's great. That's great. I imagine you feel like you learned a lot from that
Oh my
experience.
God, more than I wanted to.
But a lot of that now, that wisdom, insight, experience is now going to be invested, if you will, in Inversion Art, right?
Totally. And also just in understanding the plight of artists. I mean, musicians and visual artists are not the same, exactly, but there's lots of similarities. And whether it's my experience just being a hobbyist painter or my experience as the front man and manager of a band, I understand what artists go through, and definitely bringing that to this experience, as well as, of course, the company building expertise. And so yeah, I mean, like, my business partner is the one with all the art world credibility, and we put together a really phenomenal, like, kind of who's who team of people from the art world. But I guess what I'm bringing to the table is just an understanding of this type of company building, these type of accelerator programs. I actually built 2 accelerator programs already for tech, for other tech companies. The Queensland University of Technology in Australia brought me out to Australia to build an accelerator for them. So I've built 2 accelerator programs, been through YC, and yes, definitely all of that experience is being applied to what we're doing now.
Now, one of your investors is a past guest on the show, Will Stringer, and one of the things that brought Will and I together was his role in crowdfunding. I think he raised some money for his enterprise with an investment crowdfunding effort, and is supportive of that with his portfolio companies. Are you thinking about that at all?
We've thought about it. One of the things about building a company in the fine art space is that it's a really incredible brand building exercise. The fine art space is a whole other animal, right? It's built on reputation and provenance, and there's just a lot that goes into building a brand there. We've thought about crowdfunding. I wish we could, but we kind of feel like it's just not the right look for us. I would love it if great angel investors and other folks were to come to us, but for us to run a publicly sort of announced crowdfunding campaign is a little off brand.
Yeah. You've been very successful, Joey. You've done so much good stuff. As you think about your experience, your successes, what do you see as your superpower?
Yeah, I actually I've seen this podcast before, so I actually asked my co-founder. I was like, "Well, I know he's going to ask me this superpower question. What?" And we both sort of agreed that it is that I am like equal parts left-brained and right-brained. That you know I've been an artist my whole life in one way or another, but I stumbled into a career in business, and have sort of always just sort of excelled at like whatever I wanted to do, whether it was creative or whether it was business. And I think that, I tend to be in more like marketing and partnership roles where I get to be very creative. I like to think that the problem solving that I apply to a lot of business scenarios comes from my creative thinking and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think my superpower is just being like half artist and half business person. Probably maybe more like 55% business person and 45% artist. But yeah, I think that would be it. It's just this sort of rare combination of creativity and business.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
It is fascinating because that is such an unusual thing. Most of us, are identifiably one side or the other. Kind of, we see those in our strengths, our skills, and our abilities. So, can you think of an example of a time when your ability to employ both sides of your brain uh, manifested in a success that you're proud of?
Sure. I mean, I think a great example actually is oddly enough is like creating the investor pitch deck for Earbits, which was the previous company that I was working at or that I built. I think of creating like fundraising pitch decks as a very creative exercise. It's a storytelling, right? Like you're literally creating a picture book for investors about the company. But the more it's a story, the more that it is fun, the more that it is exciting. Those things really help. And it's really funny. So, actually, when I was going through Y Combinator, it was time for demo day, where you get to present to all these investors, and they have a pretty formulaic, like they have, they advise all the founders. Here's the formula. You do this, you say this, and this and that. This is what works. And I knew that was not going to work for us, because of the toxicity of the music space from a venture capital perspective. I knew that if I said what we do first thing out my mouth, all of the investors were going to be looking at their phones and texting like taking care of their emails while I was finishing my pitch. So,
Yeah,
we only had, I think, 2.5 minutes to pitch, and I spent the first minute and a half explaining this story about meeting my co-founder, putting the band together, having problems with marketing, and coming to a conclusion that the solution to our problem was X. And then I said, we do X. And everybody then got it, right? They were like, "Oh, like I see." And afterwards, one of the partners at YC came up who had told me that this was never going to work. My pitch was like, not sticking to the formula. Came up, said, I owe you an apology that we heard yours was the best pitch of the day." And I think that's because I'm as much a storyteller as I am anything else. And so, I think like creating compelling narratives around business is really fun for me. I love helping other founders with their pitch decks and things like that. That's a lot of fun for me.
that's such a perfect example. Now I want you to think about kind of a challenging pair of questions. You choose the order you want to tackle them, but for those who have a right-brained bias, how would you coach them to engage the left brain? And then vice versa, for those who have that left brain bias, how would you coach them to engage the right brain more?
Oof. Let's see. Well, I think, first things first is that there's just sort of this narrative in the creative world that you should just be, especially in fine art as an example. I mean, I think it's gotten to a point where in music it's I think hip hop did a lot for making musicians realize that it could be cool to earn a lot of money. It can be cool to have sponsors. It can be cool to have products and build businesses, and that can be on brand as an artist. And now you see artists of all kinds doing that, and it's starting now to affect the fine art area. So you see fine artists like Tom Sachs teaming up with Nike to design a new shoe, or Julie Meritu designing the new Amex card. Like 10 years ago, those things would probably not have been considered on brand for a fine artist. But now I think it's just like that world has opened up, and people have a different attitude about artists monetizing what they do. And so I think one of the first things is like, just let's get past this idea that artists are supposed to be like these purists who never think about their own careers and instead make something cool and cross their fingers. Like, that's just so silly and toxic to me. I think that that's one of the big things about what we're doing with Inversion is, like just making business and the art market not such a dirty word, and like, asking these artists, like, what do you want to happen professionally over the next 5 years? What are your financial goals? And so often they're like, nobody's ever asked me that before. And so I think like one of the things I would advise artists to do is realize that like at the end of the day, you are an entrepreneur who creates a product. It's different than a tech startup, but ultimately, like if you want to do this for a living, you need to think of it as a business. And a lot of them just think of like business as a dirty word or something they don't want to engage with. I'm like that with my own art. Like, like I'll be in the boardroom and pitch $1 million investment opportunity. And then I go out and somebody asks me, how much do I want for one of my paintings? And I'm like, I like, and I mean, that's like the insight I'm bringing to the project, is that I understand how irritating and annoying that is from an artist perspective. But I also recognize that like, it's silly. I have all these business skills and even I am afraid to apply them to my art. And so I think there's a lot of that from artists. And I think like, a big part of it is just a mentality shift, right? Like you are a business person and you need to be thinking about that if you want to have control over your own career. Otherwise, you are just leaving it up to luck and hoping that people recognize your talent and recognize your abilities and reward you financially. But I think that that's just not the way to have a long career. So, I would just say that, artists need to stop thinking that business is something they shouldn't or want to engage in, and they need to take that part of what they do seriously. In terms of other people, I think in terms of, business folks thinking more creatively, I don't know. Like I said, a lot of that stuff to me, like I wish I could say I like developed these things, but they just have always been something that I, that is not so hard for me. But I think, recognizing where creativity comes into your business or into your career is super important. I mean, like, like this idea that writing a pitch deck is a storytelling exercise, and that you maybe need to read a little bit about, telling stories. Maybe you need to go do Toastmasters, so I think, flexing your creative muscles is important. I think that's also one thing that comes down to is like, practicing these things, right? I mean, like if I look at my pitch decks from the very beginning of Earbits to compared to what I ended up with at the end, it's night and day. And so I think, like nobody should expect that they are going to be super creative right out the gate. And, it's a muscle you have to flex. And I think it's important for entrepreneurs to flex it, whether they're doing it through, sort of being involved in the design process or what have you. But yeah, those would be my suggestions.
No, that's great. That's great. I really appreciate sharing those insights. So, Joey, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Before we wrap up, would you take a minute and tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can learn more about Inversion Art? If there's an investment opportunity, tell them how they participate in that. If they can apply to be an artist in the program, tell them how to do that. Let's make sure people know how to follow up with you appropriately.
Sure. So our website is inversionart.com. There's plenty of ways to contact us through there, and it does go directly to me and my co-founder. So yeah, we would welcome any outreach. There is a sort of artist interest form for artists who would like to be considered for the program. We're at this point, not inundated with those applications. We haven't even really like publicized the program all that much. So anybody who fills out that form now is certainly going to get a pretty quick response, and we're happy to take a look at what they're doing. So yeah, any artists who are interested, certainly there's the early interest form on our website. There's the regular contact form to reach out to us. We're pretty accessible. And then anybody who's interested in maybe getting involved in the business side of things, we've raised capital for some incredible people. Anybody who wants to be part of that journey, same thing, hit the website, or my email address is just joey@inversionart.com.
Fantastic. Well, Joey, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in your quest to help artists become more successful financially.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you for highlighting companies that are doing wonderful things in the world. Appreciate it.
All righty. Let's do some good.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers, good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.